again, and we are finishing up in Genesis chapter 13 tonight, and invite you to open up your Bible and study there with us, and Lord willing, we'll make our way through a couple of chapters tonight. We've got visitors with us again, and we're glad you're here, and invite everybody to join in. You know, in those first few chapters, there's so much that we can talk about, but as we get into these later chapters, they are still familiar to us. But maybe there's less. I mean, I guess there's plenty of room to speculate wherever you want to. But maybe we're given more details. And so certainly since they're familiar chapters, these are times where people have thought a lot about these and have good things to say about that. And sometimes it's hard to make comments when it's unfamiliar territory because you just haven't had the time to think about those sorts of things. And so in these areas where you do have something to say or questions to ask, please feel free to do that. One thing that Stephen Russell made mention to me the other night after class, look back in chapter 13, and I'll kind of use this as a way of review to get us back into the lesson. Remember, we were talking about Abram and Lot, and they're going their separate directions. When was this written down, and for whom? Yeah, so Moses is the one who's writing it down. And who's he writing it down for? Israel. And what are they on the brink of doing? What are they right about to do? They're about to go in the land. What lesson might they learn from Abram and Lot that they really need at that moment? Don't be mixing in with those people. All right? So the people in the land of Canaan had a long history, especially with sexual immorality, as we're going to see with Sodom and Gomorrah. And that's going to be a theme really throughout the book of Genesis. And so when the children of Israel come back to the land, 400 plus years later, right as they're about to go in, Moses is reminding them, look, there's been a long history of Abraham's family interacting with the Canaanites. And if you get too close, things go badly. And so you have that parenthetical statement there. This is at the end of verse 10. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. Well, at that moment, as Moses is writing it, Sodom and Gomorrah has been long destroyed. And so he wants them to be thinking about that. So that is a helpful exercise. Of course, everything that's included is included because God inspired it, right? Because the Holy Spirit decided to include it. But when we think about who the writer was and what the audience was and what the moment was in which it was recorded and who would be the first readers, I think sometimes it helps us get a little bit more about, well, what might the lesson have been intended to be at the very beginning? And notice Abraham trusts God to bless him in the land, and so he's not worried about living close to the Canaanites. He's kind of maintaining his distance. And that ends up being a blessing for him. So any thoughts through verse 13, which I think is more or less where we got to last time. Mr. Gerald, anything to catch us up to speed?
Also, what you said about Moses.
Yeah.
Him writing this about the time they got there. He also told them that what God had told them before they went in there.
Yes.
That they wouldn't make no treaties with them.
That's right.
And if they were to destroy them, they were supposed to take them all out. And they were supposed to follow God's commandments. And they still disobeyed.
Right.
And they had this lesson to go back to, that the people was so bad that God just annihilated them, and they still do.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about the destruction of the Canaanites and things like that. And I think Sodom and Gomorrah kind of serve as a preview of what's coming to all the Canaanites. And we'll talk more about that even tonight in Genesis chapter 15. But in Leviticus 18, there's this list of sexual sins. And some of the things you think, why in the world would anybody need to list that out? That's not something we're supposed to be participating in. And then at the end of the chapter, he says, because these are the things that the people of Canaan are doing, and that's why the land's spewing them out. And so this a legacy, if we can call it that, this history of immorality, it has finally reached its peak, and God's going to come in judgment. So Sodom and Gomorrah serve as a preview of that. So looking at verse 14, let's read the rest of the chapter, and then we'll make some comments. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring can also be counted. Arise, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So we may have read some of this the other night, but what promises are restated to Abram here? All the land promises, and also what other part of that promise?
Descendants.
Yes, the nation, the descendants. And what figure is used to talk about the number of descendants? The dust of the earth. So we're going to see lots of different figures, illustrations that are used to talk about how numerous they are. But dust of the earth, I think, is one of the first ones that we see. And I want you to notice that word forever in verse 15. That might be jarring to us because, as far as we understand it, they will not possess the land forever in the sense of never ending. But the word here is olam. That's the Hebrew word. And you'll see it a lot in the Old Testament. And almost any time the word forever is used, it's the word olam. In English, it would be like O-L-A-M. But the word there is really something like indefinitely or on and on. Now, it was not an unconditional thing. It was, even as you read in the book of Deuteronomy, also authored by Moses. There's no sense that this just gets to keep going no matter how you act in the land. But there's a conditional aspect to it. So it is indefinite, right? If Israel responds appropriately, it's just going to roll on and on and on and on and on and on. Olam, forever, indefinitely. But it's not the sense that it's an unconditional forever. And I think that's important as we're reading through other parts of the New Testament, Old Testament especially, when we think about what God says, particularly with regards to Israel. Because somebody might come to a passage like this and say, well, God still has promises for physical, national Israel. He still has promises for Israel, but not for national Israel. For the Israel that is the true Israel, which is Christ. And so we have to think about these things in a little bit different way.
Couldn't you also say that, we may be taken forever different than the way God actually meant it when He told it to Abram? Because even when Babylon come down and took Jerusalem and destroyed it, there was a remnant that was left there when He took all the rest of them out.
Yeah.
And even up today, the descendants of Abraham still are in that land.
Yeah.
So
what I would say about that is that the nation of Israel now that exists today is very little connection to the national Israel that existed as the descendants of Abraham. And what I mean by that is from 70 AD or whatever until 1947, there was no nation of Israel, right? And so it was only as a result of World War II that land comes back. You see what I'm saying? So it hasn't been a continual occupation for 2,000 years.
I'm not claiming as a nation. I'm just talking of descendants.
Sure.
People of the DNA of Abraham.
Yeah.
In that area.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems to me that God does not have much concern, at least as we read the New Testament, about the physical DNA that somebody has anymore. Whether they're a descendant of Abraham or not, that's not the primary consideration.
It kind of seems similar to what you had with that.
Yeah.
So indefinite nature.
That's right.
So they would say they're indefinitely, but it was conditional.
Yeah.
On their obedience, and they weren't.
I agree. That's right. That's right. So as we come to chapter 14, any thoughts through the end of 13 you have?
What's your thoughts as far as having him walk the land out?
Yeah, I think that probably was symbolic as much as it was anything. That's the way in which he took ownership of it. And really, the thing is that Abram never became an owner of this land for the most part. But this is a sense in which he I don't know. So God says here, He says, I will give it to you. I think there are some places where that same phrase, even that verse, is, I have given it to you. That it's already Abram's. Now, he doesn't possess it in the sense that he has ownership of it, that he's taken it.
But
it's his.
Are sure.
It's so sure that he has given it to him. And so Abram is able to walk it freely as someone who this is his, at least in promise. All right. So, okay, 14. You want to take us? I'm sorry. I will butcher the names for us if you want me to, and then you can make the comments. How about that? I feel like every single time.
And I'm thinking, hey, the 4 versus the 5.
Yeah.
That simplifies things.
Yeah. I feel like every time I get you with the names. So if you want, I'll take the names and then I'll let you comment. How about that? I mean, I don't have much to say about them either. So, I mean, we can do that. We can just say, there were, Well, we'll give it a whirl anyway. All right. So 14:1. In the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goyim, these kings made war with Bera, king of Sodom, Bersha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, Shemeber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. And all these joined forces in the valley of Siddim, that is the Salt Sea. 12 years they had served Kedorlaomer, but in the 13th year they rebelled. In the 14th year, Kedorlaomer and the kings who were with him came and defeated the Rephaim in Ashtaroth Karnaim, the Zuzim in Ham, the Emim in Shavah Kiriathaim, and the Horites in their hill country of Seir as far as El Paran on the border of the wilderness. Then they turned back and came to En Mishpat, that is Kadesh, and defeated all the country of the Amalekites and also the Amorites who were dwelling in Hazazon Tamar. Then the king of Sodom, the king of Gomorrah, the king of Admah, the king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar, went out, and they joined battle in the valley of Siddim with Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, Tidal, king of Goyim, Amraphel, the king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits, and as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot, the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, and his possessions, and went their way. Then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre the Amorite, the brother of Eshcol and Aner. These were the allies of Abram. When Abram heard that his kinsman had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them, and went and pursued as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman Lot with his possession, and the women and the people. Okay.
Outstanding. Outstanding.
If you pretend that you know, it just
it sounded really
hit it full speed.
I could say it with authority, but I promise it wouldn't have came off that way. No chance.
Yeah.
Anyway, you have these 4 kings, and these are kings that are occupied in Mesopotamia. So they're to the north, and you have the 5 kings to the south. They're south of the Salt Sea or the Dead Sea. And here, these 5 are paying tribute. They are under occupation of these 4 kings. But how long are they under occupation? Yeah, they're under occupation for 12 years. They served them. And then the 13th, what did they do? Yeah, they rebelled. Then what happened? On the 14th year.
They come down to make war with them to show that they were part of it.
Yeah, the kings of the north come down and decide they're gonna thump some heads. They're gonna straighten them out. And along the way, it seems that they may travel east of the Jordan. And as they come down, they're taking out people and tribes on their way. But they get to the valley of Siddim, and it makes mention that the place is full of bitumen pits, or I think the King James says asphalt pits, or some may say tar pits. And it seems that, I'm not sure the wording of whether the king of Sodom and Gomorrah perished in those pits, but some perished in those pits. Where did the others? Where did they go? Yeah, they flee to the hillside. So the kings from the north, Mesopotamia, they begin to go into Sodom and Gomorrah, and what did they take?
Everything
that
was in there.
Yeah, I mean that's the spoils for the victor. So they're taking everything, including Lot and his possessions. Well, someone from those that escaped come to Abraham. Where is he at? Yeah, he's in that hill country that they fled to. And so they tell him what has taken place and that Lot was a part of the booty, as it were, that they take from Sodom and Gomorrah. And so Abram, he seems to get 318 of his own household. How large is Abraham's household now? Isn't that massive? And amongst that, we'll see later that there are others there from the region that help in this effort. And so they travel north. They go north and they overtake the kings from Mesopotamia. And they chase them. How far north do they? Yeah, up to Damascus. Verse 15. All the way up to Damascus. So we're reaching beyond Canaanite territory here, going after Lot and the others from Sodom. And so he brings them back, and as well as with Lot, the possessions, women, and the people. And so they come back. Everything works out, seems to, in the end. But here we see that Abram's a pretty powerful man within this region already.
Yep.
He's established him very well. And of course, who's backing Abram in this? You know, this isn't just an effort of this man and in his own resources, but God is obviously backing him. But we see what is possible with God and what he's able to do, even with a newcomer in the territory.
That's a side of Abraham that I don't think about very often. I mean, when I think of Abraham as a peaceful farmer, herdsman, wealthy, but overseeing. But I mean, you see him round up a small army of his own household.
Mm-hmm.
He had
trained men,
and he led them into a battle, and it talks about dividing his forces, just like almost a military leader. And I just don't think about him like that. But you read this and think, wow, he was a multifaceted.
You almost get the sense of like a tribal chieftain more than just a farmer. Like he's in charge of a pretty big round of people. And maybe that points to the blessing that God had given him. Maybe it points a little bit to the enrichment that he had gotten while he was in Egypt. But even still, I think it does give us a different light on Abram. What else? Any other comments? It's possible. I think we can look at this and see that this is written in a way. So we're probably 4,000 years removed from these events happening. Abraham, a good date to keep in mind is about 2000 BC for Abraham. So it's not exact, but it would be give or take. So I like to keep kind of round numbers in my head for when I'm trying to do chronology or timeline. So about 2000 BC. So we're about 4,000 years removed. Well, the people who are first reading this, written by Moses, would have only been about 500 years removed from it. And already at that time, Moses is having to give clarifying terms to which one, to where is what. And so you have some of that clarification going on here. And maybe even in some ways kind of annotated by someone along the way to give us some sense of where these things are. But notice where Lot is in verse 12. This is just kind of a practical comment. Where is Lot at this point? He was dwelling in Sodom. If I understood correctly, back in chapter 13, he just kind of pitched his tent toward Sodom. Or maybe even as far as Sodom, and now in 14 he's in Sodom. And so he kind of is moving more in that direction, finally to the point where when we see him again in like chapter 18 and 19, he's sitting in the gates of Sodom. Right now he's reached a position of influence and notoriety in Sodom. And so you kind of see how this progression works. He's kind of on the outskirts, and then he's just kind of in that direction, and then he's in Sodom, and then he's influential in Sodom. And that doesn't happen by accident, right? You don't just kind of slip into that. Anyway, anything back down through verse 16 or so. So Abram is the victor here, the king of Sodom. What's his role been in this? Has he been very successful here? No, right? Yeah, yes, like his men are falling in tar pits. He has not accomplished very much here. So Abram is clearly the victor and it seems to me he's clearly the person who's in the position to dictate terms of what happens next. And so keep that in mind as we go to verse 17. After his return from the defeat of Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Shaveh, that is the king's valley. So here you have the king of Sodom coming out to Abram. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, we'll have to say a lot more about him, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And Abram gave him a tenth of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abraham, Give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me. Let Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre take their share. Okay, so you've got kind of a narrative of Abram's interactions with two kings. And I really want to start with the king of Sodom. Ooh, scared me to death.
Put your phone on silent.
Yeah.
It's still.
The fact I'm still sitting in this chair here is amazing because. Okay. Yeah. You know, that'd be a good invitation. What if that was a trumpet? Would you have been ready? Would you have been? Man,
Almost was, wasn't
man, it was for me almost. That's exactly right. You better be ready. You can have your phone on silent. It won't matter. Man. All right. Okay. So now, what do you view as the attitude of the king of Sodom here as he comes to Abram?
I think he humbled himself.
You think the king of Sodom does? Yeah. I think it's interesting that his first words to Abram are, give me. As if he's in a position to dictate to Abram. The king of Sodom entirely depended on Abram for all this. Really, the king of Sodom's position towards Abram should have been, I'll take whatever you want to give me. Or, you want it, I'm your servant. That's not really the attitude. And maybe I'm missing something. But Abram doesn't respond, he doesn't respond favorably to the way the king of Sodom talks to him. He kind of dismisses him and says, look, I'm not taking anything. You can keep it. The only thing I want is, I'm just taking what my young men have eaten. Right? That's all I want from you. You can take the rest of it. I don't need your stuff. It's almost as if the king of Sodom, Abram views this as a situation in which the king of Sodom thinks he's going to be Abram's benefactor. Right? He thinks King Sodom, I don't know what his name was, king of Sodom, thinks that he's going to be the one to really bless Abram here. And Abram says, you can't bless me. Right? I've already received what I've received from God, and you can just keep it. I don't need it. So that's interesting, especially in contrast with the other king, not the king of Salem, but the king of Sodom. Yeah. I kind of mixed up because I did it the wrong way. I did Sodom first.
But one thing that Abram actually told King Sodom,
Yeah.
this was God's.
That's right.
You didn't have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
I ain't going to take none of your stuff because you'll turn around and say that you give all this to me. God give me this and all that I have.
Yeah, that's definitely the sense that I'm reading this in. Now, maybe Abram's not as hostile as that, but that's kind of the sense that I have of it. Now, let's go back to the other king, the king of Salem. Now, what's his name? Melchizedek. Yeah, that's right. Now, Melchizedek is important. Sometimes when we're looking at these Old Testament accounts, I think, well, maybe we're paying too much close attention to the details. Maybe we're not supposed to read into every bit of that. And then I come to Hebrews chapter 7, where every single part of this matters, right? The fact that Melchizedek's name means King of Righteousness is brought up in Hebrews 7. It's like, well, maybe I should be looking at the meaning of every name in the Old Testament to figure out something extra here. But there's a uniqueness to Melchizedek. His name, first of all, is King of Righteousness. But what is his role? What are his jobs, his positions? He's priest and he's king. We don't read about many of those in the Old Testament, right? Yes, go ahead.
Indication that we have priests. This is the first time priest to the Most High God has been mentioned. I think this may very well be the first time the word priest is used. Now, some of the words around priesthood have been used, like sacrifice and altars, in the garden when Adam was told to tend and to keep the garden, those two words are used, like in the book of Leviticus, to talk about the priestly work. But as far as the word priest, I don't know. I wouldn't. I mean, obviously, I wouldn't bet on it, but I'm not sure that there is a time where it's used before now. So it's an important moment, right, when the first priest is mentioned. He's king of what city? Salem. Now, which is Jerusalem. Jeru means kingdom of, or kingdom of, or kingdom. So Jerusalem, and really that word Salem is peace. So he's the kingdom. He's the king of the place of peace. So all of this means something. Hebrews 7 brings almost all of it up. Now, what is the relationship here between Abram and Melchizedek? Is it hostile like the relationship between Sodom, the king of Sodom? No. How would you describe it? Respectful on Abram's part towards Melchizedek, and really on Melchizedek's part towards Abram. He recognizes that what Abram has comes from God, and recognizes they have this in common, that Melchizedek is priest of the Most High God, and Abram is his servant. Abram is on his side too. Anything else? Somebody was going to say something? Yes, yeah.
You kind of see Abram defer to him.
That's right.
Like
yes. Yeah. That's right. Very good. So, I say all that to say this. Melchizedek is a preview of what Jesus will be. Right? He is priest and king in Jerusalem. Well, the very time next time we see a priest and king in Jerusalem, it will be Jesus, right? And that is significant. I'll pitch it to you. Okay. Because Jesus is a priest after the order of Melchizedek. Abraham pays tithes, gives a portion of his resources to Melchizedek. The Hebrew writer says this is proof that Jesus' priesthood is better than the Old Testament priesthood, than the Levitical priesthood. Because Abram, who was the ancestor of the Levites, and would be more important than the Levites, because he's the ancestor, paid tribute, paid tithes to Melchizedek. So that means the Melchizedekian priesthood is better than the Levitical priesthood. And Jesus is part of the Melchizedek priesthood, not a part of the Levitical priesthood. And so that might seem like a convoluted argument to us. But the very point that the Hebrew writer is making is all of the qualities that made Melchizedek's priesthood special are what makes Jesus' priesthood special, right? Without beginning and without end. And that he's king and priest. And that he is not, in the record, he's not a priest that has to be replaced. That he just continues on and on. So, I say all that to say this, that when we're looking at these Old Testament narratives, the details are not inconsequential. We never understand a New Testament reference to an Old Testament passage less when we understand its context. And the more we can know about what was going on at the moment, at the time, I think the more sharp it makes our understanding of how New Testament passages use that. And especially in contrast with Sodom. Abram would not let someone take a position of authority over him if they didn't really deserve that position, right? We see that with Sodom. And yet when it comes to the king of Salem, Abram is very cognizant of the fact, I'm the person that's in a position of maybe even service here. And that makes the contrast all the more sharp to me of how Abram responds to Melchizedek when he shows right here in this paragraph, he's not responding to everybody like that, right? Not everybody gets to come and act like a benefactor, act like somebody who could bless Abram. But Melchizedek can. Melchizedek is one who can bless Abram in some meaningful way. Okay. Anything through the end of 14?
Do you think the Jews ever looked at Melchizedek and thought, Abram, he's already got the promises.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So it's promised people. And Melchizedek's not part of that. But obviously, I would assume they would look at it and say he was pleasing with God. Do you think they ever reflected on that at all?
I don't know. So in Psalm 110, so I know Melchizedek came up because in Psalm 110, verse 1, so you know verse 1, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. I think it's the most quoted verse in the New Testament from the Old Testament, right? The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand till I make your enemies your footstool. Everybody, all the Jews looked at this as a prophecy of the Messiah that was coming, right? David looks down into time and says there's coming a time where the Lord, Yahweh, says to somebody who is David's ruler, David's Lord, sit at my right hand. Reign here until I put all your enemies under your feet. Well, verse 4, talking to that same character, that same one who said to sit at God's right hand, David writes about him in Psalm 110 and says, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek. Right? So I don't know what they made of that. But there was something about Melchizedek that, well, obviously Psalm 110 is inspired. But Jews had to think about that, right? Like now that it's in a psalm, they have to reckon with what is this going to mean. And I think what it was is that they knew somehow there was coming a day where the kingship and the priesthood would be reunited. And the reason I think that's true is because in Zechariah, at least twice, it talks about the king and the priest being the same. And I think Isaiah 52 is one of these passages. So at the end of Isaiah 52, you have the servant who's exalted. Kingship language. Well, then what does that king do in chapter 53? Offers himself as a sacrifice. Priestly language. So I think that there was something there. Well, I know there was something because the Hebrew writer brings all this together and says that there was a stream, a line in the Old Testament that looked forward to the time when the king that reigned on the throne would also be the priest that interceded for the people. Now, what the Jews made of all that, I do not know. But that's the only other time Melchizedek is mentioned in the Old Testament, Psalm 110. And it's in as clear of a messianic psalm as it can be. And so the Messiah is tied to that. So when the Hebrew writer comes and brings all that together in Psalm 110, it's just, dropping knowledge all over the place because it's like, obviously he's inspired, but bringing all of that together to show how this was always part. And here's the point the Hebrew writer makes out of that, is this shows it was always God's plan for the Levitical priesthood to come to an end. Because if the Levitical priesthood had been okay, if it had been sufficient, then why would David, 1,000 years after Abraham, been looking forward to another priesthood? Why would he have cared about the Melchizedek priesthood coming if the Levitical priesthood was fine? And the Hebrew writer's point is it wasn't fine, that there had to be something else. And the thing that surpassed it is rooted in this occasion right here in Genesis 14 with Melchizedek, which is, I don't know that would be a compelling argument to a skeptic for why to believe the Bible. But man, when you see all of those threads tied together, and I don't do a good job of tying them all together, but when you see how that works, you take a guy mentioned twice in the Old Testament in very random places and build all of that off of it, it's really remarkable.
3 verses here.
That's right. Yeah.
3 verses.
Yeah. I know.
The depth is just...
It's incredible.
I was thinking about this king of Sodom as well. Mm-hmm. The original king died. So this is his replacement. Mm. And so it almost seemed like to me here he's trying to establish himself. And here maybe, he recognizes Abram's power, his authority, his resources. And so here if he can manipulate this situation, and maybe he's got a favor coming in return from Abram in the future. Mm-hmm. That would be a nice thing to put in your back pocket. That's right. And Abram doesn't seem to fall for it. No, that's right. That's good. Yeah, he doesn't show in any way that he feels like Abram doesn't indicate at all that he's going to be dependent on Sodom guy. He doesn't need that. He didn't need the land that Sodom offered in chapter 13, and he doesn't need the gifts that Sodom offers in chapter 14. He depends on God, right? He can tell Lot, you can go toward Sodom, I don't need it. And he can tell Sodom, you can keep your stuff, I don't need it. Which maybe is a remarkable turnaround from the lack maybe of faith that we see at the end of 12 when he goes to Egypt. Maybe Abram has learned from that experience, and now he's not going to let another king enrich him
So, I don't know. That's things to think about. Yes, sir.
Is there a correlation to Melchizedek coming out with food and drink as a high priest and Jesus doing the same thing?
Yeah. So I know, is it the King James that says he comes out with bread and wine? I don't know what should be made of that, but it's hard not to think about the Lord's Supper, especially with all the connections that are already made. So it's like, well, maybe you're going too far there. It's like, well, I would have thought the Hebrew writer was going too far if I didn't know it was inspired. And so the fact that he comes out with bread and wine, maybe just as a picture of the provision that God is making. But, well, what was the provision that God ultimately made? So John 6, Jesus said, my flesh is true food and my blood is true drink. And he didn't mean that as literally eat my flesh and drink my blood. But there was a sense in which that is the gift. That's the food that he's providing, that this Melchizedek priest is providing. So, yeah.
He comes to people as well.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus comes to people. The high priest went to him in the Leviticus system.
Yeah. You know, and Austin raised a question a minute ago, how would the Jews have thought about this? I think that this does raise questions about what's going on with Gentiles away from the Bible story. And I think something that's helpful about this, the fact that we get this information in chapter 14. In chapter 12, God says, okay, I'm focusing on the family of Abraham. But it was always for the blessing of all the nations. And so I don't take that to be that now all of a sudden there's nobody else who God is paying attention to or who knows about the true God. And in fact, that's not the case when we look at Melchizedek. You know, it's interesting. I don't know all the details. I don't know how it comes to this. But Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, when we get to the wilderness wanderings period, he's going to be a priest in Midian. And it seems that he has some connection to Yahweh. So you start thinking about all this, and it was possible for somebody not to be part of the family of Israel and still know the true God. And so, you know, obviously that wasn't the case for the vast majority. Job, yeah.
Of the East.
That's right. Yeah. And then along the way, God's interactions with those people don't stop, right? So whether it's Rahab or Jonah to the Ninevites or things like this, we get glimmers all the way through the Old Testament that show us that God's intention was always to be known and be a blessing to the whole earth. And so that might be something that I don't know if that's what you were asking about with the Jews when they were thinking about this. But, you know, we just finished studying Isaiah, and Isaiah is full of references to a time where people from all nations are coming in. And it doesn't seem like they gathered that as much. So, I don't know.
Mark, to
your
point, it's kind of interesting, too, this name that God has called here, God Most High.
Yeah.
As Lamb, not just in the Scripture, it's in the Hebrew, it's the supreme leader.
Yeah.
So you've got kings coming together, and Abraham says, no, I'm the supreme leader.
Yeah.
Because it's the supreme God, the one overall.
Yeah.
And so that kind of ties to your point that you're making about the Gentile nations and kings outside of that.
That's good.
There's a reference here to God being the God overall.
Yeah, I think it is helpful. And maybe there's a lesson in that for the people who are reading this about to go in the land, right? Like there would be the temptation to rely on those other nations as they go in and maybe make alliances and things like that, as Mr. Steve may mention earlier. And Abram here demonstrates early on that, listen, if they're not a God Most High worshiper, you don't want an alliance with them. That there are people who are like that. Maybe Rahab is an example of people who are willing to submit. But you don't need to make alliances maybe with other people. That's a great point. Yeah, and it's not used that much. I think it's used in the Psalms maybe a couple of times, but not much at all. Okay. Anything else? So I love what the Hebrew writer said in Hebrews chapter 5. He's like, we're going to talk about Melchizedek, of whom we have much to say, right? And if the Hebrew writer had much to say about him, you know, I take things a whole nother level with much to say about things. So, but the Hebrew writer does give us a lot of insight. But I think that is a good way of thinking about the Old Testament. We should be looking for things that are pointing us to Jesus. And I don't think that the New Testament gives us an exhaustive list of all the ways in which the Old Testament points us to Jesus. I think it shows us how to find those, how to look at the Old Testament in a way that is God-honoring and in Christ-pointing. And so, anyway. Anything else?
You think?
Yes, sir. I'm ready. Go ahead.
After these things, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. Fear not, Abram, I am your shield. Your reward shall be very great. But Abram said, O Lord God, what will you give me? For I continue childless, and the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. And Abram said, Behold, you have given me no offspring, and a member of my household will be my heir. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir, for your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and said, Look toward heaven and number the stars, if you are able to number them. Then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. And he believed the Lord, and he counted it to him as righteousness. So here, Abram, as things settle down, he's concerned. And of course he should be. I mean, how is this going to work out? You've made a promise to me, and I'm still childless. This Eleazar is he's not a descendant of mine, but he's the heir of my home. Surely you're not going to work through him. And God says, no, you will have a son. Even in your old age, you're going to have a son. And again, going back to, 13, when he made the analogy of his descendants, there he used the dust of the ground. This time, what does he use? Stars of the. Is anyone able to count the stars? How many have ever tried to do that? As kids, we probably did. And of course, you lose track. There's no way to do it. It's impossible. But that's how broad, that's how massive his house is going to be. And so, how did Abram respond to that? He believed it. He believed them. That's faith. I mean, because we're talking about things that are a stretch to believe. I don't know at this point in time. We're fixing to read. I think Abram's been in the land for about 10 years now, so he's 85. And his wife is barren. How's this going to happen? We're talking about, an effort that's going to have to take extraordinary measures to accomplish it. But Abraham believed him. Now, obviously, as the story plays out, Abram wasn't sure how this was going to fully play out, and it seems that he wants to help God's hand in this, but he believes God. He believes God's promises are true. And so...
do you think he was just wanting some confirmation?
Sure.
And he may have been wondering, is this what you meant by that? When you said that my descendants, that he would be the natural heir. Maybe he's looking for clarification, I guess. But the certainty with which God says here, no, is going to be your own son. I think one translation says, out of your very own loins. And I think the NIV says, your own flesh and blood. Right? Like he clarifies very clearly here who this is going to be.
And you can kind of somewhat understand Abram's mindset in that, the promises are made to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so, now wait a minute, my wife's barren. How's this going to happen? So, we may have to go another direction with this. You can somewhat understand that in some sense.
All right. Any thoughts through verse 6?
A lot of people think that this was stated Abraham righteousness when he offered Isaac. But how many years will it be till he offers Isaac?
Yeah.
Because it's 13 more years, 14 more years till Isaac's born.
Yeah.
And then Isaac is old enough to carry the wood for a sacrifice.
Yeah.
So you're looking probably 20 plus years. Wow. And here we think it's when he's offered Isaac. No, it's 20 years before that and more. Yeah, he actually goes through quite maybe some emotional turmoil, because I think that Abram thinks that it's going to be Ishmael. Right up, I mean, when Ishmael's born, I think Abram thinks he's the one. In fact, when God comes and tells him that Sarah is going to have a son, he says, well, let Ishmael live before you. I think his idea, why can't it be Ishmael? And I think Ishmael was like 13 years old at the time when Isaac was promised to be born. So for 13 years at least, Abraham thought this is the heir.
Of course, he has an emotional attachment.
He does. That's exactly right. So what you're saying, I think, is interesting, because this is before all that happens, and then it's before Isaac is born, and it's before he grows. And so for Abraham, so the book of Romans 4, he hoped against hope that God could bring life out of Sarah's womb. That is hope. When there was no reason to hope, Abraham hoped. And the reason he did that is because he trusted God. And we've seen what that faith looks like, right? This is not, so somebody says, well, look, Abram was saved by faith. Yeah, but what kind of faith? A dead faith or a living faith? James 2, that says faith without works is dead, uses this passage and says Abraham was justified by his faith, which was fulfilled in his works when he offered Isaac on the... That demonstrated that Abram really did trust God's promises to give him descendants. If he didn't really trust God, then he wouldn't have offered Isaac. But in giving Isaac on the altar, Abram is showing, I trust you 100%. I know you'll accomplish this. I'm not worried about it. And the Hebrew writer, Hebrews 11, says he thought that God would bring Isaac back from the dead if need be. So I know we're kind of getting ahead there, but that's the that's the totality of Abram's faith here. It is not just a mental acknowledgement or even just a heartfelt trust. It is a loyalty to God and His will. And that's a beautiful thing about the faith of Abraham.
That's action.
That's right.
From James.
Oh, yeah.
Happened in Genesis 22.
I see.
No, you got to look.
They put it all together. Yeah.
Years before.
Mm-hmm. I agree. That's right. Yeah, that's great. Very good.
And then notice how fast his family is.
Mm-hmm.
All the way to Damascus, where he just went and got lost.
Yeah.
3-4 day journey just to go fight.
Yeah. That's right. Well, that takes us to the middle, or not really even the middle of 15, but it's where we need to stop for time's sake. I appreciate everybody's input. I know I talked a lot about Melchizedek, but it's fascinating, and there's more that we could say about that. If you have questions or comments next time about any of this, if you ponder it through the week, you can't do it Sunday night because that's singing night. But the next Wednesday will be 1 week from today. We'll be back in Genesis 15. All right, thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Good job.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.